If you talk about TMX being involved, as we know, as painful as it was, that was built. And there are others that have built in that regard. And all of these customers have, with the right circumstances, supported pipelines. So I don't think you have to look too far to see concrete, real examples of Enbridge and other pipelines being willing to be the proponent of a pipeline if the conditions are set. Capital will go to where the conditions are set. And today, the conditions are not set for that pipeline to exist in Canada.
That was Enbridge CEO Greg Ebel in a broadcast exclusive interview earlier in this show. He says the conditions still aren't there for a pipeline development in Canada right now, but he has referenced Prime Minister Mark Carney and his promise to build, baby, build. Now, the Federal Major Projects Office is now in place to fast-track approvals. So how far should or could the Prime Minister go to meet industry demands? Let's bring in the front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark, she's now Senior Advisor at Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is the former Chief of Staff for Prime Minister Mark Carney and former Liberal Cabinet Minister. CTV political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is also here. He's now a Policy Advisor at Edelman. And former federal Conservative Cabinet Minister Monty Solberg. He is the CEO of New West Public Affairs. Thank you all for being here. And so you all heard what Greg Ebel said there. He believes that Canada could be an energy superpower, but there are just too many regulations in the way right now. But he also said that if the regulations are changed, Enbridge would entertain the possibility of being a proponent. So, Christy, where does that leave the federal government now?
Well, it would be great if there was another pipeline through British Columbia. When I was in my government, we approved a number of pipelines, including TMX, and the way we got there was to set out a pathway to get to yes, and we called it the 5 conditions. TMX met those conditions. We approved TMX, and the project went ahead. And then it got a little bit more painful, as Greg said, as time went on with the Trudeau government. But it happened because British Columbians and First Nations understood that that we were watching out for their interests by making sure that those 5 conditions were met. So I could see the same logic applying to this. The challenge with this is going to be that the First Nations in those northwest communities are absolutely almost 100% opposed to it happening. I mean, you've got the Kitasoo, you've got the Haida, I think the Haisla are opposed, you've got Bella Bella's opposed. The only group that may be in favor of it is the Lac Kw'alaams, which is a plus. It's going to be very hard work to get there on this. It's going to take some time to get there, but I don't think it's impossible. I will just finish my comment by saying this, Mike. This federal tanker ban was a joke when they brought it in, and it's a joke now. And the reason it is because the Americans are shipping bitumen along the west coast of British Columbia from Alaska down past all the way down the coast. And they're doing it almost every day. The tanker ban doesn't affect them. And guess what? There haven't been any bitumen spills. So I think there's some myth busting that has to happen. There's a pathway to yes that has to be defined. And then there's the issue of the British Columbia government, the EB government, which is dead scared of any conversation about oil on the North Coast. I think British Columbians, if it went to a referendum, I think people would pass it. But the NDP base will not accept a David Eby government supporting this project.
But James, do they get to that path to yes, even within the EB government, if they do feel that there is sign-on from First Nations communities? And the reason I say that is because, of course, yesterday we saw that statement from the coastal First Nations, which was basically saying that they don't support it at all. And it would seem that no matter what regulations the federal government does do away with, that will be the one thing that I don't think the federal government can push past, or frankly, provincial governments can push past. So how do you get that path to yes with First Nations?
Not, frankly, with any of the arguments that I've seen so far. Like, it's fair for people to say that we need to do extraordinary things in the auto sector, steel, aluminum, or lumber sector because of Donald Trump. But a lot of coastal First Nations in British Columbia, if you say to them, Donald Trump is an existential threat to the economic well-being of Canada in the near term, we need to do some extraordinary things, therefore build a pipeline to the West Coast. A lot of coastal First Nations say, well, I agree with the first part, but the second part is by no means ipso facto a remedy for that. So I think Christy's right, is that the coastal First Nations relationships are going to have to come a very long way. But also, look, this is a test for Prime Minister Carney. He's the one who said build, baby, build. He's the one who said he's in favor of pipelines if they're done responsibly. He is the person who supported and put forward Bill C-5, which had the support of Liberals and Conservatives, and by all I can tell is all of Canada's premiers across the country. The question for the Prime Minister is, I know you want to be seen to be in favor of a pipeline, but do you actually want to be in favor of a pipeline? Flat question. Do you actually want it to happen? Bill C-5, what it's really about is, if a project has the support of the Prime Minister, it's likely going to go forward. Does a pipeline have the support of the Prime Minister? There's nothing that was said in that interview by Greg Ebel that was frankly new. This is stuff that we've known for 15, 20 years about the state of the dynamic in Canada in terms of getting pipelines built in this country, making it an attractive dynamic. But the question is, does the Prime Minister actually want to do this? Is he actually going to put in the legislative work in order to make the amendments to the legislation that we all know so well, and actually see this become a reality? Or does he just want to be seen to be in favor of it? It's time for leadership.
It feels like the next person we should ask about this is his former chief of staff, Marco Mendicino. So I guess that question goes to you, Marco. I mean, is this something that the Prime Minister really wants to make happen?
Well, it will come as a shock to no one that I do believe that this is a test, and it's a test that the Prime Minister will pass with flying colors, precisely because he is committed to building major projects which are in the national interest. It will also come as a surprise to no one that Premier Smith, who represents an oil-rich province, wants to build an oil pipeline. And the Prime Minister and the federal government have laid down the gauntlet by passing Bill C-5, which my colleague James Moore correctly pointed out that the government passed very quickly last June. So let's apply some of those criteria to this project. Will building this pipeline contribute to energy security? I think the answer to that question is yes. Will it add to our economy? I mean, if what we hear in the proposal is that it could generate as much as 1 million barrels of oil, then yes, it will generate some revenues, and it will generate some jobs as well, potentially thousands of jobs. That would be good for the economy. Now, where are there challenges? There are challenges when it comes to First Nations. I think part of the response has to be to, one, consult, but two, empower First Nations on the ground when it comes to equity and ownership. And there are loan programs that have been introduced by both federal and provincial governments to certainly work and partner with First Nations in a meaningful way. And finally, when it comes to achieving our climate goals, we've heard about the Pathways project in Alberta, which could help with carbon sequestration and capture. And so there is, if you take all of those factors, a way in which you could contemplate seeing the successful execution of this project, but it will require a lot of work. It will require work both on the ground with folks who live in those communities. It will require cooperation between Premier Smith and Premier Eby, who's had some comments about it. And it will take the commitment of the federal government. And you've already heard Minister Hodgson say that he will consider this proposal as soon as it's put forward.
Monty, when you consider the collaboration that needs to happen between Premier Eby and Premier Smith, do you think we are at a position where they can sit down and have a conversation about this, knowing how much it means to Alberta and knowing how much, as Christy had sort of said, that it really feels like, the rail that they don't want to touch when it comes to the NDP out in BC?
Well, of course they can sit down and have a conversation. I think they've done that in the past. But let's remember, this is a national conversation. This is for the good of the country. This is the project that will produce wealth for not just Alberta, for Canadians. It will free us from a complete reliance on President Trump. It will ensure that First Nation communities can benefit wherever they are throughout Alberta and in British Columbia. These things are all the reasons why certainly David Eby and Danielle Smith need to sit down, but it's also why we should be, as Canadians from coast to coast, getting behind this project. I think it was very wise of Premier Smith to take the stance she's taken of becoming the proponent, at least in the short run, to show the seriousness of the government of Alberta. But it also underlines the fact that Alberta needs this project for the Premier to go back and face the people that she represents. She has made commitments over and over again to do her best to ensure that Alberta oil gets to the coast. And if she doesn't, it's going to cause all kinds of problems with unity within Alberta.
Mike, can
Chris,
I
I've only got about a
quickly
minute
say-
left. Talk a little bit about that, and specifically because I know that yesterday Daniel Smith said this is basically a test. I'm paraphrasing, basically a test of Canada as a country.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think, Canada is very complicated. British Columbia is even more complicated than most provinces. So, I think if it succeeds or fails will depend on whether or not they've done a good job in trying to persuade people. But you know how I said, I don't think the NDP would ever do it. I'm 100% convinced that they won't. But I do think if we had a referendum in British Columbia, it would pass. Well, you never know. There might be a referendum in British Columbia on the government when there's an election. So it's worth thinking about this future with the odds that there might be a new government in British Columbia that's fully supportive of pipelines that's elected in the not that distant future. If that happens, the odds of this project going ahead are much, much greater.